Welcome to Blood and Business.
I'm Bethany.
And I'm Cassie. Today we're talking about a sister duo literally born and bred for the world stage. They were two of the most glamorous women of the 20th century. One changed the White House forever and set a new template for what a First Lady of the United States could be and would be. The other would wander for a lifetime, trying to find her own limelight and step out of the shadows of her sister. Their lifelong quest? Money, power, and glory. And they found it. But it never quite satisfied the hunger that they both carried. They will forever be remembered, but they lost each other along the way. They are Jackie O, Jackie Kennedy, and Princess Lee Radziwill. This is part 2 of The Bouvier Sisters. Okay, so when we left off, both of the sisters were just starting in their careers, and Jackie had gotten a journalist position in D.C., and then Lee was working for a magazine in New York. Jackie was not quick to rush into a marriage. She had decided that she definitely did not want to marry any of the guys that she grew up with. Not because of them, but because of their life and what their life would mean for her. But by the time 1952 rolled around, she's 23 at this point, and she started to feel the pressure of, the societal norms and, oh my gosh, you're getting ancient. You're 23 years old.
Better start popping out them babies.
Exactly. So she ended up getting engaged to a New York stockbroker named John G. W. Husted Jr., who was a friend of her stepfather, Hugh Auchincloss. So obviously this was a partnership that was approved of by her family, and he actually had a shocking resemblance to her father, Blackjack Bouvier. And that is going to be a theme that you'll see with both her and Lee. They both dated basically all people who looked and acted almost exactly like their father. Jackie and John were supposed to get married 6 months later, but Jackie, in a moment of clarity, realized, okay, this is not what I wanted. What am I doing? And so she broke off the engagement as quietly as she could. When John was getting on a plane to go back home after visiting her, she slipped the ring in his pocket so that nobody around them would know, but he would find it.
She didn't even tell him?
It doesn't say. It just says that she literally slipped the ring into his pocket. Maybe they were like hugging or something and she was whispering to him like,
I can't do this.
Yeah, hopefully. Otherwise, on the plane, he's like, why do I have her ring?
Oh my God, devastating.
Yeah. But I will note that this moment of clarity for Jackie came after her mother did some digging around and found out that he actually wasn't as wealthy as they thought that he was. So around this same time, Lee was also dating. She did not share her sister's hesitancy to get married. In fact, she was going to make freaking dang sure that she beat her sister to the altar. So that spring, when Lee was 20, she married Michael Temple Canfield. He was 27 years old and he was like a handsome publisher. He wasn't a super huge socialite, but he was kind of up there, and he had a good career. Yes, exactly. They had known each other and dated on and off since she was 15 years old. So that would have made Michael 22. One time, Michael Canfield took both sisters on a boat ride in Central Park, and he told about how the sisters acted, and I feel like it's really insightful. So while he was rowing, the two sisters were whispering together in the back of the boat in deep conversation, and they were leaving him completely out of it. So he was like, what are you guys talking about? And they just said in unison, gloves. What I can't figure out, though, is like, were they really talking about gloves? Because how did they both notice they gloves? But like, they couldn't have been whispering about gloves.
Yeah,
you know?
I don't know. That's
maybe
weird.
that was like their code. They were always like, if anyone asks ever, just gloves. At this point, they were still really close. This was right after their trip to Europe together. So the wedding was held at Marywood. That's the Auchincloss estate in Virginia, right outside D.C. And Jack Bouvier gave his daughter Lee away. It was Jack's first time to Marywood. And although it was a really proud moment for him, as a father to get to be there and give his daughter away. He was also having a little bit of a bittersweet moment because he was, for the first time, really seeing Hugh Auchincloss's life, and it was like a big reminder of everything that he had lost or given up.
Had. Yeah.
This, my friends, is when the story starts to get much, much larger. Within 1 month of catching Lee's bouquet, Jackie became engaged to the most eligible bachelor in America, the dashing young senator from Massachusetts, John F. Kennedy. Kennedy was very, very rich. Canfield was not. When they got engaged, Jacqueline and John Fitzgerald Kennedy had been seeing each other for about a year after being introduced by a friend at a Washington, D.C. dinner. And let me just interrupt right here and give a little disclaimer for all of the Jack names in this story. Obviously, Jackie is Jacqueline Kennedy Bouvier Onassis. She's the sister. And then her dad was named Black Jack Bouvier. And then JFK, John Fitzgerald Kennedy, goes by Jack Kennedy. And then later on in the story, another Jack comes into play. So pay attention, and I will try to, if it gets really confusing, I'll try to clarify. So Jack Kennedy was impressed by Jackie's intelligence and beauty. And though Jack Kennedy, JFK, had infamously wandering eyes, he was a total playboy. Jackie found ways to keep his attention during their year-long courtship. So there's not really any reports of any infidelity or him being unfaithful during their courtship. The first time that they were publicly noticed together as a couple was when 23-year-old Jackie accompanied 35-year-old Jack as his date to Eisenhower's inaugural ball in January of 1953. The wedding was held on September 12th, 1953, and was publicized as the wedding of the year. So just 8 months after they were first seen out together, they got married. Once again, Black Jack Bouvier, Jackie and Lee's dad, was invited to escort his daughter down the aisle. But this time, he wouldn't be able to do it. He traveled to Newport, Rhode Island, the Kennedys' hometown, and was on his best behavior. But something happened that weekend. He ended up being too intoxicated to walk his favorite daughter down the aisle.
How mortifying.
This was the story that Jackie was told, that he got drunk. It was his own freaking fault. He must have been upset about seeing everything that everyone else had. But later, it came out that although Black Jack was a little tipsy that day, he wasn't the reason that Hugh walked Jackie down the aisle. Turns out Janet had sent one of the Auchincloss kids to go to his room and uninvite him. And that's when he really started drinking. He wasn't crazy drunk until he got uninvited, and he had to watch it all happen without him from the back of the church because of Janet. And she did not tell Jackie.
That would be so hard for me to forgive my mom.
Black Jack went back to New York and drew up his will, and according to his nephew, became more of a recluse than ever after that. He holed up in his new apartment with his housekeeper, and she was basically his sole companion for the rest of his life. He lived for his daughter's phone calls and visits, but they were becoming increasingly fewer and far between because Jackie was now the supportive wife of a senator, and Lee was living in London with her husband, Michael Canfield.
That is terrible.
Awful.
How could you live with yourself? You're not even just hurting him.
The girls.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You're literally destroying a relationship, and neither of them really know what's going on.
Black Jack continued to send Lee and Jackie small checks and would always include a little sweet message on them. But on July 27th, 1957, Black Jack was rushed to Lenox Hill Hospital in Manhattan, suffering from severe abdominal pains. His doctor hadn't told him that he had cancer of the liver. He just didn't tell him. And by August 3rd, so that was July 27th when he felt the pains, by August 3rd, he had slipped into a coma and died at the age of 66. So as soon as she found out the news, Jackie flew in immediately and began organizing the funeral for her dad. Her family was impressed by her competence in handling all of the arrangements so gracefully in such heartbreaking and traumatic time. For the funeral, instead of the usual black and somber attire that people normally wear to a funeral, Jackie told everybody that she wanted it to look like a summer garden, like Lasata in August. It was a small funeral attended by mostly family and then a couple of Black Jack's former girlfriends. After the funeral, his will was read. He left a lot of family members, like small little things, but most of his estate went to Jackie and to Lee to be divided equally. They each got approximately $80,000 apiece after taxes. And then to Jackie, he also left a painting of an Arabian horse, and then to Lee, he left his writing desk. So that was all in 1957. Let's rewind just a bit to 1954 when Jackie was 24 and Jack was 36. Jack Kennedy, by the way. JFK.
Oh, he's quite a bit older than her.
Yes.
Okay. How many? 10, 11, 12? 12 years? That's not crazy.
No, it's not crazy.
But that's a difference.
After getting married, Jack and Jackie settled down in Georgetown while Jack served as senator for Massachusetts. He was a war hero. His eyes were either green or gray, depending on the lighting. And he was about as charismatic as Jackie's father had been, Black Jack. Jackie's half-brother said that he still remembers meeting Jack Kennedy for the first time. I was a chubby, somewhat snobby 6-year-old in black velvet shorts, a silk shirt, lace cuffs, and patent leather shoes with brass buckles. The day Jackie brought him home, I already had an opinion of him. A Catholic, Democrat, perhaps liberal, Irish, and a politician. He was, in every way I had heard anyway, definitely an outsider. I stood at the top of the long staircase, glaring down the flight of red carpet at him as he entered the house. I coughed loudly to draw attention to myself and then snorted in my haughtiest voice, "Hello, Kennedy." Jack looked up and retorted in exactly the same tone. "Hello, Auchincloss." We honestly may need to do an episode about him and his brothers next season because the Kennedys have a story. We need to watch Chappaquiddick.
We need to watch what?
Chappaquiddick?
No, I've never heard of that. Scandals.
There's murder with Jack's brother.
Didn't Taylor Swift date like one of the Kennedys?
Yes. You're right. So Jack and Jackie loved each other, but it was also more of a practical pairing than a passionate one. JFK was starting to think about his chances in the Oval Office, and he was greatly encouraged by his father that a Playboy bachelor who probably was not going to do well in the polls. He needed a wife and a family, and Jackie was perfect. She was Catholic. She had been to all the right schools, and though she actually wouldn't, the Kennedy family thought that she would inherit like a ton of her family's fortune.
I'm thinking about why they would think that she was inheriting so much money. Because of her stepfather?
Yes, I think so.
They didn't know that that was her stepfather? And that he had like 12 other kids?
I mean, I think that they knew that he's her stepfather, but they think...
He was just so loaded that they were like...
Right. Hugh Auchincloss had an insane fortune. And then also, I'll talk about it later, but Lee and Jackie's grandfather, Janet's dad, had a ton of money as well. They thought that they were going to get something from him. And then they probably didn't know that Black Jack Bouvier was not as rich as he appeared to be because he lived an extravagant life. They probably thought that they were going to get money from a bunch of people.
Okay.
And you'll see, but it just wasn't the case. Rich people need to stay rich, so you need to marry rich. So they thought that she was going to be perfect, which appearance-wise and for Jackie, who she was as a person, she was absolutely perfect to be a first lady. For Jackie, JFK promised a more exciting life than what was expected from like all of the men that she grew up with, the ones that she did not want to marry, because she was just going to be a housewife for them. And for JFK, he's got this amazing career in politics. He's making moves in the country. Like she had already been to Europe. So she's like, I want to make a difference. And Jack provided that for her. But he would also be able to provide lots and lots of financial security. So obviously her mother approved in a way that she did not approve of Michael Canfield. As for Lee, she told Jackie that she should snatch him up. And if you don't, I might. 1 month prior to marriage, there started to be a few red flags, and you know that Janet was asking around trying to figure out like who are the Kennedys actually, and are they actually rich? And when she was asking, she was finding out, yeah, they really are that rich, but also she was hearing some concerning things about Joe Kennedy, Jack's dad. It seemed to be a pretty widely known thing that he had been unfaithful throughout the entire marriage that he had to Jack's mother, and they had been married for a long time. And Jack's mom believed that as long as the behavior wasn't flaunted, it was acceptable. Pretty much everyone knew, like, oh, Joe Kennedy, the dad, just like sleeps around with whomever he pleases. And as long as it's not talked about around the house and he doesn't like flaunt it or bring his girlfriends around, doesn't bring them to meet the family or whatever, then it's fine. It's like acceptable,
like an unsaid
behavior.
Yeah.
And so, of course, the money part was awesome to Janet, and that did count for something. Like, she definitely was like, money might be the most important thing. But because of what she had gone through with Blackjack Bouvier, the girl's dad, she, like, in her mind, unfaithful husbands were like not something she was okay with at all. It was a black and white situation, and it simply was not tolerable for her. If a man could not be faithful as far as she was concerned, he should not be married, which I tend to agree with.
Yeah.
So after hearing all this information about his dad, she's like starting to think, oh crap, this is how Jack Kennedy was raised. So that's concerning. And then Jack Kennedy went on a sailing trip to the Caribbean with another friend, senator guy. And the trip had been planned like months in advance, but she was really concerned because Jack and Jackie were engaged and literally like weeks away from getting married, and she didn't understand why a man who was supposedly in love would take a vacation without his fiance so short before the wedding. She thought that it was like a red flag, and so she voiced her concern to Jackie. Well, Jackie said that she felt that she had the coping skills in place to deal with someone as unpredictable as Jack. She said that he had the potential to be something great and maybe powerful, and Jackie was willing to overlook everything else.
Is she more concerned about like the career aspect and just like the
so.
lifestyle that he was going to give her, the access to the people?
I think so.
And she was like, if I get heartbroken, it is what it is, but I can make the most impact through having you as a husband.
What I'm thinking from her perspective is, if you think about like what kind of marriages she's seen so far, she's probably thinking, I'm not going to get everything I want. Because like you can't guarantee with someone who isn't going to have a career and power and a less influential job, you're not going to guarantee that they're not going to cheat on you. And I think she just saw so many dudes being unfaithful that she was like, if that's going to happen to me, I may as well
get the perks of
exactly
this guy's career and life and money and all of that.
Yeah, so I said at the beginning that one of the sisters like totally bucked the system and kind of got rebellious against the stipulations that her like culture put upon her. And then the other sister took all that she could within the roles that were set before her. And as you can see, Jackie is the one who's like, this is what I have to take. I'm going to take it. I'm going to take it all. Early marriage was a reportedly happy time for the Kennedys overall, but they did have 2 losses in addition to Jackie losing her dad. They had a miscarriage, and then the following year right after that, Jackie gave birth to a stillborn baby. When that happened, Jack Kennedy had just lost the vice presidential nomination, and he had decided to go on a Mediterranean cruise to like shake it off.
Wait, by himself or with Jackie?
With a few friends, but not with Jackie, some of which were women. Yeah. Janet was definitely a little curious of why a married man would go on a cruise with his friends while his wife was at home almost 7 months pregnant. He left before she had the stillborn. But she was also thankful to get extra time with Jackie because while Jack was away on the cruise, Jackie went to go stay with her mom at the Marywood estate. When the tragedy with the baby happened, Janet immediately called Jack, assuming that he would rush back to his wife's side and be there for her, but that was not what happened. He told her that he saw no reason to rush home as there was nothing to do about it. What was done was done. Janet was completely appalled and immediately called his brother Bobby to talk sense into Jack. No luck. So then she called Rose Kennedy, Jack's mom. She thought that for sure she would understand and get her son on a plane as soon as possible. But that is also not what happened. She said, I'm quite sure Jack knows what's best. We have had tragedy in our own lives, you know. Rose had lost a couple of children herself, so you'd freaking think that she would understand, but no. So finally, 5 days later, Jack returned from his vacation, but only after his dad and another senator friend told him that if he ever wanted to run for the presidency and expected female voter support, that he better freaking get his butt home to his wife. Jackie broke down to her mom asking how she could have been so stupid. Janet told her that she was not stupid and that it was her own fault. Knowing what she had gone through with Jackie's dad, she should never have allowed her to marry a man like Jack.
That sucks. That sucks. And also, why do these dudes sound like they're in their early 20s and they're all like almost in their 40s? Like when crap's going down and they're still such players. I don't know if it's because they're from really privileged families and so like they really didn't have to grow up.
Yep.
It like kept them.
The Kennedys seem freaking entitled as crud.
And that also sucks because, like, you can't completely turn off your feelings. Like,
that's the thing.
Even,
is, like,
even
you
for
go
a
in
friend,
open eyes, but, like, how is that not going to freaking destroy your feelings?
Right.
Lee, unfortunately, was having the same struggle in England. Though she was enjoying the social scene of London's elite, her marriage to Michael Canfield was not all that she dreamed it would be. He was a heavy drinker, and although she desperately wanted children, they hadn't been able to get pregnant. Lee started having affairs, which Michael was aware of, but he didn't complain about. Once, when Jackie visited them in London, Michael asked her privately how he could hold on to Lee. He knew that it wasn't looking too good. Jackie answered, "Get more money, Michael." He pointed out that he already had a modest trust fund and a good salary. Jackie replied, "No, Michael. I mean real money."
How devastating and embarrassing and, like, horrible. Especially for a guy. Like,
yeah, that's an insult of an insult. So Jackie had actually gone to London to ask her sister's advice on her marriage. She'd been depressed, obviously, about the loss of her children and JFK's affairs, and it was just like all becoming like very overwhelming and very real. The reality of living in that type of a situation. She had chewed her nails down to the quick and she was chain smoking every day. She seemed to be like on the verge of a mental breakdown. And so she thought, okay, what I need is some time with my sister. And although they had always had their inner competition with each other, they were still best friends. And she knew that if anyone was really on her side, it was Lee. Lee was always a good listener, and she had even wanted to fly to the States when Jackie lost her baby. But Janet wouldn't allow it. She said that it would be too alarming for Jackie to wake up to her sister's presence.
Janet needs to like get it under control. Like she's so manipulative and like a control
yes.
freak.
Like it wasn't going to be a big enough tragedy already, losing your child, if Lee didn't show up. Oh, Lee showing up is going to make it a big deal. So, of course, she meant well, but Jackie arrives in England and tells Lee about everything going on and how she'd been talking to her mom, and they both thought that, honestly, she should end her marriage. So then she goes to England to figure out, like, okay, I'm going to talk to my sister, see if this is what I should for sure do. Lee was not convinced that it was such a good idea. She reminded Jackie of all that Jack had going for him. Power, money, he was handsome, and afforded her a good life so far. Lee said that she wished that she had had a spouse as good as Jack. Someone who would do something big with his life, and by extension, hers. It didn't matter much to Lee that Jack was unfaithful. She told Jackie, "Daddy did it to Mummy, and it all worked out fine." Fine for who, though?
Well, like, Lee's the cheater, so
exactly.
She's not going to tell her sister cheating is
right.
Warrants for a divorce.
But Jackie didn't know that.
Oh, she didn't know that she was cheating?
No, not yet. It was on that trip where she was like starting to figure out what's going on here. Jackie was completely shocked by her sister's reasoning. In her mind, as well as her mother's, adultery was absolutely unacceptable. And this was the first time she'd ever heard her sister say that it was okay. She couldn't understand how they were raised by the same parents and exposed to the same events in their childhood and have such different perspectives. And it made her wonder what kind of marriage Lee and Michael actually were having. Because again, she did not know. All she knew was Michael's an alcoholic and he needs to get more money. Mm-hmm. And they can't get pregnant and they want to. She wouldn't wonder long though, like I said. One afternoon while she was visiting the Canfields on that trip, they received an invitation to the estate of a lord and lady to go shooting on their property. They went out to the English countryside to this estate. Over the weekend, Jackie began to notice Lee's behavior around a certain Polish aristocrat, Staś Radziwiłł. It seemed a bit too flirtatious for a married woman. They were isolating themselves and seeming to get to know each other a little too well. So when she got back, she asked Michael in private about how her sister's relationship was actually going with him, and he immediately broke down crying.
My God, this poor dude.
Yeah. He said that he believed that Lee was cheating on him, and Jackie could not believe it. But with the response that she got from Lee about Jack's unfaithfulness and the way that she was acting over the shooting trip, she was like, maybe?
Yeah, starting to put the pieces together.
Yes. So Jackie and Lee, you'll see, were not great at communicating for their entire lives. And so after Jackie heard this, she didn't talk to Lee about it. She just started becoming more and more silently resentful. And by the time she left England, the sisters were not on speaking terms.
How long was this trip?
I don't know.
Had to have been a minute.
Few weeks.
Yeah.
Okay, so by 1958, Jackie had given birth to her first child, Caroline Bouvier Kennedy.
Okay, so at this point, they have been married for about 4 years, and Lee and her husband have been married 5.
Yeah, about that. Okay, so they are having their first baby, and along with a maid, a nurse, a butler, and a cook, had moved into a 4-story 19th century mansion just down the road from her mom and Hugh in Georgetown. And do you recognize the name Caroline Bouvier Kennedy? Caroline is Lee's real name. Remember, her dad just started calling her Lee. Mm-hmm. So she named her first baby after her sister. And then Bouvier, obviously, is her maiden last name. So she kind of did that just like her mom did. And so that's kind of a tribute to her mom, but also a tribute to her dad because it's her dad's last name. And then obviously Kennedy is Kennedy.
So cute. So I love that.
Cute. Lee was happy for her sister and appreciated her niece being named after her, obviously. But she couldn't quite help being frustrated that Jackie had always seemed to have it so good while she was scraping pennies. She had to reach out to her grandpa for an extra allowance, her mom's dad, and claimed she could not possibly be expected to live on what he was willing to give her as an allowance and what Michael could provide. That combined was still not even near enough. And then Jackie had married a senator, wealthier than anyone in her family, and then had a baby with him. And at this point, she had figured out that Michael, her husband, Lee's husband, was sterile, and they were not going to be able to have children. So on top of this mansion with all of this staff and a new baby, her sister also had, with Jack, an apartment in Boston, and they purchased a home in Hyannisport on the Kennedy compound. And she could also tell that Janet, their mother, was much prouder of Jackie than she was of herself, of Lee.
It also sounds like they were just a lot closer because they lived near each other and she lives in another country.
And crap was like happening and going down. And I think that Jackie was more communicative with her mother than Lee was. And so it was all just too much for Lee. And really the only person who didn't prefer Jackie over Lee was that guy, Stosh Radziwill. He'd say, Lee is bawdy in a way that many women aren't these days. Yet she also has a certain kind of class, a certain refinement that's a paradox, really. It makes her more intriguing. He told Lee that as far as he was concerned, there was really no competition. Jackie was too guarded and careful. Lee was better. Open, full-on conversation of like which sister was better. It was on that level. Like Lee was literally like talking to her boyfriend, lover, of like, who's better, me or my sister?
That's crazy that she's so insecure.
It's sad.
Yeah.
This affair with Stosh Radziwill would change Lee's life forever. He was 20 years her senior, and he was married to his second wife at the time. He was reportedly very charming, and it was a descendant of a notable family in Poland. But he had actually lost everything to the German invasion and operated as part of the Polish Underground, which was a resistance group during Hitler's reign. He had escaped to London at the end of World War II and had nothing but the clothes on his back. And then he used literally only his charm and his wits and like the things that he knew about high class to marry a Swiss heiress and then climb the social ladder and eventually made a fortune in real estate, just like networking and knowing the right things to say. So Lee is still married to Canfield at the time. This is just the affair. Canfield's drinking had accelerated at this time. His time at the American Embassy was about to end, and honestly, their marriage was essentially over before her affair with Stosh had begun. So Lee and Stosh wanted to get married, and Stosh was adamant that it be in the Catholic Church. The only problem was divorced people cannot get married in the Catholic Church. The only way to do it is to get the previous marriage annulled. It cannot be a divorce.
You can get your marriage annulled if it's been that long.
I guess so, if there's like good enough reason or whatever. So Stosh was still married to his second wife, but they only had a civil marriage license. Like they hadn't gotten married in the Catholic Church, so it wasn't like gonna be recognized. So he was fine because he had gotten his first marriage annulled. But that process took years, and Lee was still currently married to Michael, and they like wanted to get married in the Catholic Church like ASAP. So this is where Jackie comes in. She needed her sister's help and her connections. Lee asked her sister, "Haven't you ever done anything crazy for love?" Jackie told her, "For love, yes, but not for this. This isn't love." Lee insisted that she did love Stosh, and she wanted her sister to wish her happiness. So Jackie, hoping to repair the relationship, agreed and was able to use the Kennedys' connections to expedite the annulment process. And so she helped Lee get ready to marry Stosh. Before the annulment had even been processed, though, Lee got pregnant with Stosh's baby. Here is John Radziwill, Stosh's son from his previous marriage. "So my dad left my mom for Lee. It was sad for the family because my father had been the love of my mother's life. But when Lee broke the news, he said, 'That's it, I'm going to marry you.' 7 years after they met, on March 19th, 1959, Lee Bouvier Canfield became Princess Lee Radziwill, and in August of that year gave birth to her son, Anthony Stanislaw Albert. Stanislaw is Stosh's full name. John Davis, a historian, wrote about this marriage years later. When Lee married Prince Radziwill on March 1959, she was a childless, relatively impact Eunice divorcee living in a by no means opulent apartment in London, who had been occupying her time with various fashion assignments, such as running the fashion show at the American Pavilion at the Brussels World Fair of 1958. Within 2.5 years of her marriage, she had become one of the great ladies of the Western world. So basically he's saying like the most notable thing that she was doing with her life, or like quote unquote with her life on paper, was running the World Fair
Fashion show.
And then after her marriage to him, she was like one of the great ladies of the Western world. Like everybody knew Lee after that. When Stosh had become a British citizen after fleeing Poland, he'd been required to officially give up his prince title, but somehow, I don't know how he did it, he managed to hang on to it, as did Lee. And for Lee, it was a prize she was not going to give away. Especially after all of those years playing the role of the handmaiden to Jackie's princess. Jack Kennedy had pretty bad health issues, some from the war, some from a genetic condition called Addison's disease, but you'd never know it because of how lively and funny he always was. His personality and charm is what carried him all the way to the president's office. Janet and Stosh both actually campaigned for Jack, and Jack and Stosh became really good friends through this. Stosh, campaigned throughout the whole country, and he really identified with the Polish people in America, and so he swung a lot of the votes that way. And then Janet also campaigned some in Kentucky. Even Jackie and Janet were won over by Stosh's involvement in Jack's campaigning, and Jackie even gifted him a drawing of Stosh going coast to coast on a map of the US, and she inscribed it with the words, "You really did do it, Stosh."
That's so cute.
She still didn't like how Stosh came into their lives, but once she saw how dedicated he was to their family and being part of everything, it kind of helped her start to accept him. It was also a bonding experience for Lee and Jackie because both of their husbands were working together towards the same goal. And so that helped as well. And they really didn't have a whole lot of disagreements in that chapter, which is a nice change for the sisters. Mm-hmm. It is reported, though, that during this time, Lee asked that any press refer to her as her full title, Princess Lee Radziwill, maybe to make sure that everybody knew that there was more than one notable Bouvier sister. One day during the campaign, reporters met Lee and Janet at the gates of the Marywood estate to do some interviews, and one writer called out, "Any comments, Mrs. Canfield?" Lee immediately corrected him. "It's Princess Lee Radziwill." And no, I have nothing to say. Janet thought that her comment was completely inappropriate and was overheard saying, "This is Jackie's moment, not yours." On August 18th, 1960, Lee gave birth to her second child, a baby girl named Anna Christina Radziwill. But the baby actually came early and had to be in an incubator for months.
Aww.
Lee had a really hard time recovering, and she struggled with postpartum depression for about 1.5 years after her baby's birth. Stosh took her back to England as soon as he realized her depression, and even though their baby daughter was still in the incubator at New York Hospital, they went back to England.
Shut up.
I don't understand any of these decisions. So Janet, the grandma, checked in on baby Anna Christina as often as she possibly could until she was well enough to be transported to London to be with her freaking parents. So less than a week.
That's like one thing, leaving your kid due to like social unrest or like it's dangerous or like financial reasons, like you're literally going to lose everything and be destitute if you don't get back to your job. But just because you want to, because maybe you'll be happier in a different country. And like how Janet left Jackie when she was a baby just for a vacation.
I think it's that like upper class culture because they were used to having like nannies and stuff. And so they
were just like, oh, my kid is taking care of.
Take care of their kids. Yeah.
I don't know. You could advocate for your kid or just at least like oversee and make sure that the nurses are taking care of your baby. Like how does she not? I mean, I know that she's depressed and like postpartum is no joke for sure. And like you're not really yourself. But you would just think that even like her support system would be like, hey, I know that right now that you feel like you can separate yourself from the situation because you are suffering from depression. But if I was Jackie, I'd be like, dude, this is your kid. You need to stay here.
Yeah.
You can't be in a different country.
Listen to this. Less than a week later, after she went back to England, on November 8th, 1960, John F. Kennedy won the presidential election of the United States of America, defeating his Republican opponent, Richard Nixon, by one of the smallest margins of all time. Lee is in London crying every single day and super anxious over her baby, who is still in America. She was actually having trouble breathing regularly. And then in America, Jackie was officially going to be the First Lady of the United States of America. Janet called her daughter from Marywood the night of the election. "You are America's First Lady. I just can't believe it, Jacqueline." Jackie asked if Lee had heard the news and asked Janet to tell Lee that she really needed to talk to her sister. She was like asking, "Mom, have you heard from Lee? Tell her to call me." And then over in London, Stosh was trying everything he could think of to try to help Lee emotionally, but he didn't really know what to do, and their communication between the two of them wasn't great as well. Yeah. She was like explosive one minute and then she was depressed the next, and it got so bad that at one point she told him that she didn't have the will to keep living. She looked him straight in the face with tears in her eyes and said, "Why don't you just call her and talk to her if you love her and her husband so much?" And it was during a dinner party in front of a bunch of other people. Yeah, that's why it's like reported, because all these little things that like, oh, this person said this person said this. I was trying to think like, how do they know all this? But it's just those random people on the outskirts who like the reporters overheard, and then they'll do interviews and stuff. But anyway, so this was at a dinner party. Everyone could see obviously that she needed help. She needed someone to reach out, but nobody knew what to do. And because of the miles between Jackie and Lee and the new role that Jackie had and like her new duties being the First Lady, she wasn't able to be there for Lee's day-to-day emotional health at the time. And when she did talk to her on the phone, Lee was like really distant and she didn't really engage much in their conversations. And so it was really hard for her to do anything from another country. A lot of people in Lee's personal circle thought that her depression was a direct result of her sister's rise to America's throne. Like, she was struggling with postpartum when she left America, but Jack Kennedy was already in the election at that point. And then once he won, her depression just got even worse. And so literally a lot of people think that she was upset over her sister's success, especially because she said things like, "How can anyone compete with that? It's all over for me now." And in John Davis's book, The Bouviers, he states that Jackie's ascension to the White House promised to magnify a problem that Lee had had to cope with for some time. the problem of simply being Jackie's sister. Although she was abundantly gifted herself, she had often been obscured by the shadow of her sister's prominence, and now that shadow threatened to eclipse her identity.
It's almost like the whole time Lee isn't even fighting her sister. It's like she is best friends with her sister, loves her sister, doesn't even not like things about her.
Yes.
Or her personality or anything like that. It's literally just the perception, like...
She's fighting her sister's image, not her sister.
She's fighting how other people see her sister.
Yes.
She's not even fighting her sister.
Yeah.
And that's like almost worse. If you just don't get along with your sister, you don't see eye to eye.
There's nothing, a whole lot you can do about it.
Yeah, you've hurt each other a ton in the past. You've, I don't know, forsaken each other's trust. And
it's like, almost justified.
Yeah, it's almost justified. And like, yeah, you can reason with yourself of like, what I feel is okay. And like justified. But because she's not, there's no reason
likes
for
her
her.
sister.
Yeah, there's
she
no
loves
reason
her
for her
sister.
to hate her sister.
They were best friends.
And it's more of an ambiguous feeling instead of it being like a clear, you broke my trust here and that's why I'm mad at you.
Yeah, she just feels bad about it.
She just feels bad about herself when she's around her sister. And it's not even her sister that did it. Like, yeah, you said in episode 1 that her sister could have, like Jackie could have done things when they were younger to even the playing field and to include Lee
just been more accommodating and like more aware of
what Lee was going through and her loneliness and stuff. But she didn't technically do anything wrong.
No, she didn't do anything wrong. And she was a child.
And she was a child and she was like trying to be a good sister and
it honestly, like, it just is what it is.
And that
it is what happened.
Yeah.
Point blank period. It was the time, it was the personalities, it was
the family, it was the class.
All of it.
Yeah.
It was who Jackie married. It was her personality and like the way that she made decisions. It was...
Most of it was just like natural born circumstance. It wasn't even decisions that either of them made that like was horrible or...
No.
You know what I mean?
It was like Lee really did want to be a free... This is what it is. And I struggle with this as well myself. What you actually want isn't what you want people to see. What Lee wanted, the life that Lee wanted, is the life that she lived. But she couldn't make peace with that because she wanted to look a different way in front of other people. But like Lee wanted to be a free spirit and she was a free spirit.
That sucks though, because it's like, what can you even do about it other than just go through massive amounts of therapy and like coming to terms with the fact that your life is your life and that's all you have control over. You don't have control over how other people see Jackie.
Lee also made a statement around this time that, of course, Mommy loves Jackie more than me. I understand it. The severity of Lee's depression was more than anybody knew. Every doctor just told her she had a case of the blues, but she knew it was more than just sadness. There was something really wrong with her. She just didn't know what it was. She felt so fragile. And then the ceiling fell out. There were tons of Radziwill employees in and out of the house, so at first she didn't notice. But something about this one lady that kept coming to take Stosh out for errands bothered her. One day she went to the window to watch them and see what was up, and just from the way that Stosh opened up the door for her, Lee knew he was having an affair. In the middle of her depression, right when she needed him most, she was in shock. What was he thinking? The worst part was that she didn't even feel like she could talk to her mom or sister about it because
she's a hypocrite.
Exactly. She knew that they were very, very against her own affair, lecturing her incessantly, and she could already hear her mother saying, "Finally, the chickens have come home to roost." Her suppressed anger and sadness finally exploded a few days later when she confronted Stosh. He didn't really try to deny it at all. He was immediately remorseful, but he told her that it wasn't serious in the slightest. He didn't love her or anything. That actually made it worse for Lee. She had jeopardized her marriage with Michael because she loved Stosh. This wasn't the same thing at all. How could he throw away everything that they had for some meaningless fling? She just couldn't get past it, and their relationship was never the same after that.
Oh my God, I don't even know which one is better.
I don't know either.
Like you just falling in love with someone and that sucks because you fell in love with someone else.
It's worse. It's worse for me.
Or just the fact that you literally, like you innately are probably never not going to cheat because you will cheat with
I feel
someone
like that's better. I don't think it's a righteous reason, but I feel like that's better because I don't want the problem to be with me. I don't want you to not love me. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
I don't want you to choose somebody else that you like better than me. I would rather the problem be you have a character flaw.
Yeah. I think I would too. No, I definitely would.
So Lee, knowing all of this, did not want to deal with Jackie and Janet, so she'd been dodging their phone calls as best as she could. She was scheduled to have tea with both of them in New York on the 13th of December after picking Anna Christina up from the hospital on the 12th. But she canceled her trip altogether just to avoid them. And then she offered...
She's still not with her baby?
Yes.
How long has it been?
From the first week of November to the second week of December. So like
over a month.
6 weeks, yeah.
Oh my gosh. And she's not going to pick up her child, her infant, because she doesn't want to.
Because she's throwing a fit, basically.
She definitely has some issues. It's almost like a self-fulfilling prophecy at this point, and like an identity thing of like, I am just always going to be the loser. Poor me. She's almost like not even fighting it at this point.
Yeah, she's drowning in a sorrow pit of self-pity.
And not that it's not like some of it isn't justified and like understandable, but
is this really how you want to spend your life?
Yeah, and it's like she's been fighting it all this time, like through childhood.
You'd think that she would come to freaking terms with it.
She would come to terms with it, or she would just, I don't even know what.
Separates herself completely. If it's going to be that big of an issue to where you're literally...
You can't live your life.
Right.
Then maybe
just cut yourself off.
Yeah. Jackie becoming the first lady. That was the final nail in the coffin of I will never live up to
right, exactly.
your name and who
like
you are.
Like he said, the problem that she was already fighting had just become a threat to completely eclipse her identity. So she was scheduled to go pick up her daughter from New York and then have the tea with them, but she canceled the entire trip so that she could avoid her sister and her mom. So then Janet offered to bring Anna Christina to London for Lee, but Lee didn't want to see her mom. So she said, no, I'll send a nurse, because she was like, I'm worried about her needing medical attention during travel. So just like as an excuse. Mm-hmm. And Janet was like, okay, yeah, that's fine. I'll go with the nurse and we can both like tag team it and I'll come and bring my grandbaby to you. And Lee said, nope, the nurse will be just fine on her own. So once she finally got to hold baby Tina again, that's what they called Anna Christina, Lee did start to get better. Who would have thought?
Your freaking baby.
They had lots of hired help, but Lee really did take the reins on caring for her daughter, and it seemed that she was returning to her lively self again. Her feelings about Stash's affair did not change, though. He was really regretful, and he had felt pushed out by Lee is why he even had the affair in the first place. He admitted that he reacted poorly, but honestly, the damage was done, and Lee felt that it was a betrayal that she could not look past. Ironically, she was very willing to look past Jack Kennedy's unfaithfulness towards her sister, and that happened a lot. Stash had one affair.
And was regretful about it, and also a little understandable because she was like completely...
It was a really stressful time. She was raging out on him, and then depressed, and then like he...
Not that it's right at all.
No, of course not.
Or justified, but it's understandable.
It's more understandable, exactly.
Especially since he was regretful about it and didn't even try to lie about it, didn't try to cover it up.
Immediately remorseful.
Could have been grounds for forgiveness, working past it, especially since they have 2 children together.
Right.
Not that she needed to or anything, but... if she was going to say, like, okay, I'm not forgiving you for this, at least give your sister the decency of being like, I feel for you. I'm so sorry. I now understand what you're going through.
Thank you. Instead, she shut her out completely and then was willing to look past Jackie's husband's unfaithfulness, which happened all the time. And Lee recalled in an interview once, Jack used to play around and I knew exactly what he was up to, and I would tell him so. And he'd have absolutely no guilty conscience about it and would say, I love her deeply and have done everything for her. Talking about Jackie. I have no feeling of letting her down because I've put her foremost in everything.
That almost sounds like he's brainwashed because of the way that his dad raised him.
Right.
Like maybe he literally...
He was brought up in an environment where it was literally it was not wrong.
Right. Like his dad was a good provider, was a family man.
Practical wise, put his mom first in everything and like made sure that she was always taken care of. And like, that's just like what? A hobby like golfing or smoking?
Yeah. I don't know. I don't know if he's like literally just a crappy person or if his childhood honestly, straight up, like he doesn't get what it actually means.
I hope that he doesn't get what it means, but I kind of think it's both. Like he really doesn't get the severity of it, but he's also like not even trying to.
Yeah. But also they're not like communicating. Like Jackie might not have been communicating
For sure.
her hurt.
Yes. Literally, you'll see a quote later that their mom says, but their family was very, very, very like,
don't talk about
yes, very
the
hush
nitty
hush.
gritty, like skeletons in the closet. Stay in the
Everything's a
closet.
secret.
Yeah.
Don't show emotion. Don't admit weakness.
I almost feel like Lee is like trying not to feel bad for Jackie and like isn't going to give her that like win or that sympathy almost about like the affair and everything just because it's like her one thing that she's like, you don't get the perfect husband. It's like, this is your one thing that you have to be.
Or she's just like, you don't get to complain because you have everything that I want.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, but like it probably feels good that she, because Jackie does get everything and is the golden child and everything comes so naturally and easily and perfectly to her that it's like she's almost not like relishing the fact, but a little bit.
Cringy.
Like subconsciously she probably is just like, I'm not giving you that because I'm a little bit happy that you're not perfect. Like your life
isn't actually just heaven.
Actually heaven, yeah.
So JFK had at least a dozen mistresses that have come forward, not total, that have come forward since the 50s and 60s. Some were White House employees, some were university students that he met at like political dinners. One was even assassinated at close range in 1964, and a lot of people think that her assassination was related to JFK conspiracies. But definitely the most famous of all was, of course,
Marilyn
Monroe herself. And most of these affairs were not just one-night stands. A lot of them were ongoing relationships that lasted months or years. And like Lee, Jackie knew about all of it.
But honestly, what in the crud, JFK? Like,
I feel like
literally just knew that he could get away with murder and no one was going to do a dang thing about it.
No one had ever done a dang thing about it his whole life. And his whole life, he was like an important, quote unquote, powerful, privileged person.
Yeah.
He was a white male brought up in America in the upper class. Like he was the 1% of the 0.0001% of anyone alive at that time. So in any room he walked into, he was on top. No one could say a dang freaking
And he
thing.
was like born and raised on top. So
born and raised to know you're on top.
Yeah.
Other people are below you.
You are absolutely untouchable. So yeah, that's why it's like kind of he was just brainwashed. Like he literally had no chance of ever understanding. Or
it becomes a little gray when you think about the circumstances. There's an oral history housed at the JFK Library that has an audio tape of Jackie while speaking in French to a Paris Match reporter, commenting about one of the White House secretaries. Okay, so this is the reporter telling the audio tapes. Mrs. Kennedy said, "This is the girl who is supposedly sleeping with my husband." The reporter said that he was just shocked, like, utterly taken aback. That's like a very serious thing that she just casually was like,
not
here's a reporter, I'm just gonna tell him this crap's going down. She partly said it out of spite because she's freaking angry and she wants somebody to know about it. But I also think it partly shows that she didn't realize how like not okay it was as well, because she was very, very respectful of her husband's office and his like role leading the country. So I feel like
if she knew how bad that made him look, she wouldn't have said it.
Exactly.
But she's almost also like, brainwashed is not a good word, but like it's acclimated to that lifestyle.
Exactly. Like it's that slow boil, you know?
Yeah, her dad was the same way, and her mom was basically remarried before they were even divorced.
Exactly.
Lee cheated. Lee's husband cheated.
Right. So it's just like,
it's like every adult in her life who she loves and respects, they all
have done the exact same thing. But along with all of the terrible things about being the president's wife, it also was a spectacular time for the family. Being in the presence of that much power was intoxicating, and it did tend to bring everybody together. Jackie took her first lady duties very seriously, and you know that Janet was right there assisting and critiquing anything that she could get her eyes on. Jackie was the first of a new kind of first lady. She was incredibly involved in the behind-the-scenes chats with Jack. She used her intuition to help him see the genuine and the phony in the people that they dealt with, who to trust, who to watch. She also had a lot of projects herself. Many first ladies of the past hadn't really been involved in the decisions of the White House and had been very matronly, but Jackie was more like the nation's stylish big sister. There are tons of documentaries and books and articles on her influence over the country and the culture and even the world. So we won't get into all of it here because that would take for actually ever. But something to think about was that one of the biggest factors or characteristics about Jackie that helped her appeal so overwhelmingly to the people was her interest in French culture, the arts, and fashion. And who do you think instilled most of that in her? Her sister. From everything that I read, it doesn't say a ton of specific examples and stories and stuff, but in the first episode, there was that designer that Lee discovered. Later on, Jackie gets credit for him, and Lee hung around with, you'll see later, a lot of big celebrities in the art world. Truman Capote was one of her best friends. She hung out with Andy Warhol and partied with him. She hung out with the Rolling Stones. She was very much in the arts and culture, and Jackie was very much the intellectual one. But whenever you think of Jackie O, you think of the arts. You think of fashion. You think of French culture, and that was more Lee's personality, and it was kind of appropriated by Jackie. Again, there is reason for Lee to be upset, but also she did not handle it how she should have handled it.
No. Comparing to the Disney story that we did, they could have had a very similar relationship.
Oh, yes.
And it could have been why does Walt always get to do what he wants to do and just have fun and has no repercussions for anything?
Yep.
And he's gets to have his cake and eat it too. Why don't I get that lifestyle? Why don't my two other big brothers do why didn't they do for me what I did for Walt?
Yep.
Kind of a thing. And he didn't. He
took
purely
joy
loved
in
his brother,
providing for and
was so his
yes.
number one fan and just absolutely rooting for Walt. But maybe I'm wondering if it's because he was the older brother. And in this one,
I think it's personality.
I think maybe it's
I
both.
think that you would be so overjoyed to help me. And you would be so overjoyed to be behind the scenes, and you're my little sister.
That's true.
And I'm the big sister.
I don't know. Yeah, it probably does all go back to personality and the way that you're raised. And it's a little bit of all nature and nurture and all of that.
That's true. These people grew up to be entitled, and Walt and Roy grew up expecting nothing almost and being we are very average people and being grateful to have any opportunity. Yeah. And these people are
the world
I don't have enough.
Owes me everything.
Yeah. After JFK was inaugurated into the presidency, Jackie brought Lee and her mom to have a private look inside the Oval Office. It was one of the most special moments that they were ever able to have together. They spent about a half hour in there, and most of their conversation remained between the three of them. But because of the weight of that experience, from that visit to the Oval Office on, Janet no longer ever called her son-in-law by his name or by his nickname Jack, but always by Mr. President. Jackie told her he was still just the same old Jack, but after seeing that desk in that room with that carpet, she couldn't hear of it. The person who made decisions for the entirety of America was not simply just Jack. Janet later commented that it was such a proud moment and that everything felt right in the world. It would be their one and only time in the Oval Office. Lee remembers, "At that time, I didn't realize how special everything was. Although I was aware, certainly, that there was magic in the air, we were presumptuous to assume that this magic would continue." President Kennedy borrowed a credo from Sophocles and inspired those around him to live their lives along the lines of excellence. Everyone wanted to give the most of themselves because that expectation was returned. But all of the excitement and adrenaline in the world could not have kept Lee distracted for long enough. One night, in the summer of 1962, Lee and Stosh were watching TV in their London home with 4 of their closest friends. A special report about Jackie's beauty and influence came on, and immediately everyone knew how awkward it was. The whole room was fidgeting and trying not to look at Lee, but finally Stosh got up, walked over to the TV, and turned it off. He gave a slight smile and said, "Enough of her." Everyone looked to Lee for her reaction. "Yes, well, my sister is quite the spectacle these days." Terrence Landau, who was there that night, recalled, "And we all understood. When you have spent your entire life in competition with your older sister for attention and you suddenly find yourself in a situation where there can be no competition, it's not easy. Lee would complain about it, though not often, and I would say to her, "But Lee, what have you done to deserve acclamation?" This question would upset her. "What has Jackie done?" she would ask me.
It's crazy that they were so openly, or I guess Lee
was just
so
like, I
openly,
hate my sister.
Yeah, so jealous. I don't know if it's just the resources that you used emphasized Lee's perspective so much, but like I feel like I haven't heard a ton of how Jackie feels about it all.
I don't think it's the resource because I read a lot. I read like articles online. I read 2 different books, like the full things. And I think it's because, like we said at the beginning, after Jackie's parents got a divorce, she became super, like, not reclusive, but yes, closed off, walls up. She did not talk about her feelings. She barely even talked about her feelings with her own family members. And Lee was, like we're seeing right now, like at dinner parties, when friends are over, she's just, like, openly throwing up her emotions and her opinions about everything. And so there's a lot more record of Lee's commentary on everything. And Jackie was very, very, very private, closed off, and she didn't really say a whole lot. And so you can only like speculate on how Jackie felt, you know?
She's probably a lot more poised as well.
Yes.
And because she was the one that had the better end of the stick, she didn't have a ton to complain about as much as Lee, who was just openly like, my life sucks compared to my sister.
Right. But later on in the story, we do get a little bit more of Jackie's perspective. "Do you realize that I can reach anyone I want to from the White House?" Jack once asked Lee. "Do you understand the power of that?" The 2 laughed. Jackie doesn't get it. She doesn't see how much fun this could be. And in her mind, Lee knew she would have more fun with it. Jackie did try to include Lee in the role of being First Lady, but it just didn't really work like that. She brought her on her much publicized political trip to India and Pakistan, but it only reinforced that Jackie is the main attraction and Lee is the afterthought in the background of all of the photos. Secret Service agent Clint Hill was on that trip and remembers, "Mrs. Kennedy was received as the wife of the president, and Lee was kind of her lady-in-waiting when we were overseas. Her childhood nightmares literally come to life."
I don't understand why this has to be an issue. Like, you aren't the First Lady.
Yeah.
Like, you need to come to terms with your life.
That is the problem.
And I don't know what that is, but holy crap, dude. Like you said, either just be your sister's #1 fan and be rooting for her all the way and just be happy to be there, or goodbye. Yep. Like, what is your contribution? Like, what are you even doing here? It's true. Like, it sucks.
It's sad, but...
It absolutely sucks, but... Like you said, okay, visit each other on freaking Christmas and like for the holidays and stuff. But why are you still so involved with your sister's life? Herself. Yeah, you're doing it to yourself at this point. And honestly, that sucks for Jackie because
it sucks. How horrible. There's like a black cloud all over all of your successes, accomplishments, celebrations.
And you're not doing anything wrong.
No.
Like, that would be for me
and
the worst part about it. And you
almost feel guilty for nothing.
I would have so much false guilt and feel so out of control with my... Because it's... No one wants their sister to be in pain like that. No one wants their sister to feel miserable.
Yep.
Especially you being the quote-unquote issue.
But it's...
Like,
you're not
the only
an
reason
issue.
your sister isn't happy is because of you. And because you are successful. It's either like you sacrifice
give
your
up your entire
life.
life.
Yeah, and like you try and make your life suckier just so that your sister can be happier, or you just have to deal with your sister hating you, but like you don't get to have your cake and eat it too.
This is an extreme situation, and I think honestly it was perpetuated by their mom. Like the way that she raised them, they felt like they needed to perform or else they weren't worthy. Good enough as humans. Yes, exactly, worthy. Because I'm trying to think of like other people who have like super successful siblings, and why isn't there that need to be just as good as your sibling, you know?
I don't know if it's just because like they were super close. They did have that foundation of like ride or die. We are all each other have in this world. Right. And maybe with other siblings, it's
their parents. They have other siblings. Like it was just them two.
It was just
they
them
didn't
two.
have a third.
They were the only ones experiencing the whole step sibling thing.
Right.
Their dad dying. their mom getting remarried, all of the different life changes. Then they go on vacation together. And like they really did have a very close upbringing.
And their mom, on top of all of that, on top of that foundational closeness, their mom was constantly poking holes in that year one unit thing, like identity, because she was constantly comparing them to each other. Of like, no, Lee, Jackie's the smart one. No, Jackie, Lee is the nice one. What, you know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah, but it's like, why didn't that common enemy per se, like, unite them?
I almost think, yes, now that you say that, it's like because they were still so close to their mom, she couldn't be a common enemy because she wasn't an enemy. It's just all very confusing.
It's very confusing, and really the stars just aligned.
The stars aligned, but I honestly do think, just as we're confused, Lee was confused as well.
Oh, I'm sure. She couldn't not be angry, but instead of just communicating that to her sister in a more like healthy, let's work on this way, it was just like, I'm mad and it's going to be like that for the rest of my life.
Yeah, either work on it or like, hey, sister, I obviously can't handle this, so I need some more boundaries. Like, I can't go campaign with you because I can't handle it. I can't go on your like diplomatic tour through Asia because I can't handle being in the background of the photos. Maybe Lee needed some more boundaries. And maybe it was, like you said, too little too late for Jackie to include her. We need just separation.
Yeah, because at that point, she just felt like an afterthought anyway. I like researching sibling relationships because of that, because there are so many factors that go into it. And I feel like more so than with any other type of relationship, because you literally are born and raised together. You have the same DNA, so you have so many commonalities, but also personality goes into it, choices like life decisions go into it, and just circumstance, happenstance, luck.
And
like
even though they had the exact same upbringing, their circumstances were very different.
Very different, yeah.
Just because of personality and talents and skills and
the way that
natural
people talked
ability,
about them,
exactly,
their identity, all of those types of things. So I just feel like sibling relationships are the perfect nature versus nurture, or nature and nurture scenario, because you are comparing very, very similar childhoods and very, very similar, if not the same DNA.
Yeah.
But it turns out
you get to
different.
look at isolated variables.
Yeah.
Lee did a horrible, horrible damage to their relationship, and she made some of the worst decisions. She could have made such a better situation than she did, but Lee gets all of the guilt and she gets such a bad rap, and I don't know if it's completely justified and like completely isolated on her end. It's always painted as just this one-side competition, but I think that that's inaccurate and unfair because, first of all, Jackie was just always winning. And if you remember from the first episode, in her like horse competitions and stuff, she was only ever happy if she was winning. So it was just like easier for her to be a happy, pleasant person. But also, there are a few like little cracks in the surface where we can see a little bit of maybe Jackie wasn't just always like pleasant. Because on that trip, there's a photo of the two sisters and they're sitting on top of an elephant. And Lee is wearing white leather gloves and they're both smiling as if they didn't have a care in the world. In the photo, it looks like they're having an incredible time. But people who were actually there made a quote from that elephant ride famous. Jackie accidentally said out loud on her dignified political trip as First Lady, "Lee, let me take the reins." And I think that that just is like a little glimpse into, it was not a one-sided competition with just Lee always trying to fight for, like, Jackie, even in a small moment like that, was like,
me first. Yeah.
And I think that that says so much. In the first episode, do you remember that quote where it was like, you can't compete with the world likes you best? But I feel like also it's not totally Jackie's fault because she was bred to be that way. Yes. Like it was like that from the beginning when she was a child. Naturally competitive.
Yeah.
Like there's nothing wrong inherently with being competitive.
This whole story is literally just
so sad.
It is what it is. No one's really doing anything that crazy wrong. No one's doing anything that could have prevented everything. You can't point to one spot where everything just fell apart. It was just a lifetime of circumstance. And there's no villain that you can point to of like this person orchestrated it all, or it all fell down to, or it all points to this one thing, this one moment, this one decision. It is what it is. Like this was just the hand that they were dealt. So Jackie actually did
give Lee the reins. Haha. Just a year later in 1963, because she was pregnant at the time, she asked Lee to stand in for her and accompany the president on a political trip to Germany and Ireland. Of course, Lee was thrilled to do it, but it ended up being a bittersweet experience for her. Here's a quote from Dave Powers, special assistant to JFK, to explain. What do I most remember about her? Her beauty, her charisma. She was wearing a pure white coat when she got off the plane in Ireland, and she looked marvelous. Everywhere she went, she just lit up the room. She was different from Jackie. Jackie was more, I suppose, royal would be the word. Lee was a little bit more accessible, easier to know. Everyone loved her. The press corps thought she was fantastic. She was funny, very entertaining. I wouldn't say Jackie was entertaining necessarily, but it was different for the First Lady. There was a certain decorum necessary. Lee was free of all that, and we all thought she was marvelous. Lee was expecting to see what it was like to walk in her sister's shoes, to be the First Lady for just a moment, but she was viewed as just another noteworthy person with the Kennedy entourage. If she could have just seen what she did have, she had tons of opportunity to travel and do all kinds of amazing things, and people freaking loved her. Mm-hmm. She could have just been this amazing socialite, you know?
Mm-hmm. The fun one, the wild one.
The it girl. Mm-hmm. The cool one.
Yeah, it's literally all comparison. It's all the comparison that hurt her. If she would have seen her and her sister as two very individual people who wanted very individual things, they had very separate ideas of success.
Exactly.
But because of the pressure that their mom put on them, and just because, I don't know, they grew up with a ton of comparison, it's they couldn't see it for what it was.
It's like Lee was successful in what she wanted her life to be like. She had a really interesting, fun life. Jet setting all over the freaking place. She had an iconic style. Her personality was amazing. In the first episode, they met with that, wise dude. I don't even remember, but he told them, always find the most interesting person in the room. I feel like Lee was almost the most interesting person in the room all the time, but she almost couldn't let go of what society told her success was. And she couldn't redefine success for herself. And so she was constantly oh, but I'm not successful. Oh, but I'm not successful. Even though she would have been so happy with the life that she had.
And everyone, I think, did think that she was successful.
Yes.
I don't think anyone was actually comparing her to her sister. In reality,
doubt it, yeah.
No grown adult walks into a room and is I wonder how she holds up against her sister. Nobody thinks like that, but it's she couldn't get out of her childhood brain of my sister is just better than me, more popular and whatever. And so she just carried that through her adult life with her.
So right around this time, Lee found another person to tell her she was the only one. Aristotle, Socrates, Onassis. One of the most talked about, wealthiest, and most scandalous men of his time. Even his yacht, the Christina, was famous. Celebrities, politicians, and everyone glamorous was seen on that yacht in the 50s and 60s. Even Winston Churchill was known to hang out on this boat. The thing wasn't just any old yacht. It was a boat with 50 employees for the boat. Onassis owned the world's largest private shipping fleet and an airline, but his business tactics were suspicious at best and straight up criminal at the worst. Aristotle Onassis and Stash Radziwill were close friends during the late 1950s through the mid-60s, and this is how Lee first met him. He was active with great vitality, brilliant and up-to-date on everything. He was amusing to be with, and he had charm, a fascinating way with women. He surrounded them with attention. He made sure that they felt admired and desired. He took note of their slightest whim. He interested himself in them, exclusively and profoundly. Lee Radziwill. He thought Lee was one of the most interesting people he'd ever met, and he couldn't understand what could have happened to a person who was so uncommonly beautiful and poised to cause them to be so insecure and have such low self-esteem. With a mother like mine, you have to be resilient, Lee told a friend in 1962. She still loved her husband, Stosh, but everything that they had gone through made him represent pain in her life. The affair, the mental struggles she'd faced, the sickness of their baby, and his closeness to the Kennedys, it was a lot. It became easier to be around Onassis, who was exciting and new and adored her. I guess it wasn't a big deal to her at the time that he was involved with other women because he literally straight up told her, I cannot commit to making you the number one priority in my life right now. Which obviously means, like, I don't want to make you the priority.
And she is married right now still?
She's still married to Stosh, and she's starting to hang out with this Onassis guy and have an affair with him.
Dude, what is up with this chick in affairs? She just is so looking for circumstance to make her happy. Like,
yep. She can't take responsibility.
Yeah.
But to each their own, except not according to the Kennedys. They were not fine with it. And remember that annulment that Lee asked Jackie to ask the Kennedys how to get her expedited annulment? The whole point of that was to marry Stosh in the Catholic Church. And it was finally official. The annulment finally went through. The remarriage ceremony to Stosh was coming up. They had not gotten married in the Catholic Church yet. They had only gotten married civilly. And so by the time the annulment was started and then finished, Lee was already having the affair with Onassis. She couldn't even get married to Stosh yet before she was already
on to the next.
And Onassis was pushing her not to go through with the marriage at all. And the Kennedys were like, no. So Onassis is literally saying, like, no, don't get married. But also, I can't make you the priority in my life right now. Because in some far off timeline, we can be together, so don't get married.
You have to have low self-esteem for
that crap to fly.
Yes, for that crap to fly and for you to be a grown woman with 2 children. And not that being a mom or being a parent makes you just the wisest person in the world, but you would think that your priorities would be a little bit more intact and you would be fighting for your children to have the best life and like giving them everything that they could have instead of just chasing your own happiness all the time. Like she was just constantly prioritizing herself because she felt bad for herself.
Yeah.
And she wanted other people, like she wanted to find that happiness and that self-esteem in other people, I guess. Like, like you keep repeating, oh, she just wanted someone else to tell her that she was the best. So like surface level though, like that's never going to make her happy.
So when the Kennedys heard about this affair, they had something to say. Bobby immediately got on the phone with Janet and demanded that she take care of the situation. Onassis remembers, the Kennedys could accept me as Lee's lover. That was personal. What they could not accept was the idea that I might actually marry her. That was politics. So Janet forcefully reminds her of her job, her duty as the sister of the First Lady. If she chose Onassis, it would scandalize Jackie and in turn, the entire presidency. So she didn't. Kind of. She remarried Stosh Radziwill in the Catholic Church, went through with it. And a close friend at the time said that she audibly said that she felt like she was making the biggest mistake of her life, but she felt powerless. Less than a month later, after remarrying Stosh, Lee was back in Greece with Onassis. But things had changed. He wasn't as present as before. And back in the States, Jackie had gotten pregnant again, but when she gave birth to Patrick Bouvier Kennedy, the doctors found that he was having a really hard time breathing, and so they rushed him to the ICU, but he ended up passing away in the hospital the next day. Yeah, so here's a quote from Janet about it. That was the one time I ever saw Jack genuinely cut to the bone. When Patrick died, it almost killed him too. This was such a dark time for our family. Such a dark time. So Lee came from Greece, rushed back to the US, and she actually spent that night in Jackie's room, just the two of them, Jax and Peaks. I guess Peaks is Lee's nickname. Mm-hmm. The next month was bad for Jackie. Her mental health was declining, so Lee invited her on a trip with Onassis. So it was Jackie, Onassis, and Lee. On that trip, Jackie noticed that he was a lot like their dad, which was not necessarily a good thing.
I mean, yeah, he sounds like a party animal with like the freaking party yacht.
He's basically just
their dad.
The 1960s their dad
version, yeah. A little bit more successful maybe.
So, this is where, if you know anything about Jackie's name.
Yeah, I know. That's why I'm like, where is this going?
Pretty confusing why Lee is the one with Onassis first. So, we will be discussing this, starting with the assassination of JFK through the fallout, all the way through the deaths of Jacqueline Kennedy Onassis and Princess Lee Radziwill. Next episode, part 3, final episode of the Bouvier sisters. The last episode should already be loaded in your Apple Podcast or Spotify app, so click play now because I promise you
want to hear this juicy stuff. I'm ready.
It's a good story.
I'm also kind of scared. I feel like crap's all about to go downhill, and it's like they've had a decent like back and forth relationship up until this point. I'm scared for what's to come.
Subscribe on Apple Podcasts or wherever you're listening, and please give us a rate and review because we are a baby podcast and it helps us be found by other people who want to hear stories.